Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents, college counselors, students, and anyone who wants a weekly deep dive into the world of college admissions.
My name is Linda, and I'm originally from Michigan, now living in the St. Louis metro area. I'm a college coach with School Match for You and have a daughter at University of Chicago.
I'm Lisa, and I'm a clinical psychologist and college counselor. I have a daughter in college, a daughter in high school, and a son in middle school. After 30 years in Chicago, we recently moved to North Carolina.
My name is Mark. I'm a college coach in Atlanta and the parent of two daughters. Karis, a graduate of Davidson College, and she is the founder of the Spanish tutoring company, SpanishHelpToday.com. And Joy is a wellness coach at the Keenan Flagler Business School at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. And I'm so blessed to be able to work alongside both my beautiful daughters at School Match for You, college counseling firm that I founded in 2010.
Good afternoon, friends. I'm very excited about today's episode, but before we get to that, I have one big announcement to make today. We hadn't done a webinar for you in 6 months, but that's ending in 20 days because Jen Chow, the founder of Polygence, and Polygence designs creative research projects for highly motivated students who have an idea but they need mentoring. And they design these projects at very reasonable prices. So Jen Chow will be coming to us to talk about their network of over 3,000 mentors. And Jen is one of the most impressive people that I have met since I started doing interviews 8 years ago on the podcast. I'm very excited to have you meet her. So for 1 hour, you can ask her any questions and just kind of hear and learn from her and what they've learned. They've taken 6,000 people through this process. That's going to be Sunday, April 13th at 8 Eastern, 7 Central, 6 Mountain, and 5 Pacific. And even if research is not something of interest to you or your student, I just encourage you to come because you're going to meet someone along the way in your life. I can all but guarantee it, who's going to be interested in research, and you're going to have the knowledge to know how to direct them. So just go to yourcollegeboundkid.com, go to the events page, and sign up for the 1 hour webinar. Hope to see you there. It's April 13th. All right, friends, on today's episode, I'm going to do something that's a little different. I'm going to give you part one of what's going to be a 2-part series. And today on part one will be the first part, and then second part will be March 31st, or episode 522. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at the college process through 2 different lenses. The first lens we will cover today is what are the most time-consuming components of the college process. And the second lens, which we'll look at next week, and that is when should you be doing these time-consuming things that we're going to talk about today. And then we're going to have a brand new interview. It's a 2-parter. It's with Rob Franek, the editor-in-chief of the Princeton Review. And I know I just interviewed Rob 4 or 5 months ago on how the Princeton Review surveys can help you understand the strengths or weaknesses of the schools under consideration for your student. But Princeton Review just released their 23rd annual College Hopes and Worries study, and I thought it would be interesting to have Rob come in, share their key findings, because they surveyed almost 10,000 students and parents. And this is year 23 for this survey that they do every year, so they've kind of got it down. But let's dive in with our discussion about what parts of the college application process are the most time-consuming. So, friends, for the purpose of this discussion, I'm only including things that you explicitly do for the college process. For example, one of the students I worked with this year was spending 28 hours a week on gymnastics. But I'm not counting that here because she isn't doing that explicitly as part of her college applications. In fact, she's not even planning on doing it in college. So I'm going to exclude extracurriculars because you shouldn't be doing them primarily to make your college application look robust in the first place. You should be doing them primarily because you're just pursuing what you love. I'm also not including things like planning for the summer of your rising senior year, or even the summer activities themselves, which can be very time-consuming. You may be at a camp for the whole entire summer. But once again, you shouldn't primarily be going to a camp for the whole entire summer or doing what else you're doing this summer. For college, you should be chasing what you love. not trying to pad your college resume. And I know some people think that's naive, but that's just how I see it, and I'm going to be true to myself on this one. So let's first mention some things that are part of the college process that are very important, but they don't necessarily take a lot of time. And included here would be a lot of things, like, for example, attending college fairs, attending sessions when colleges come visit your high school, doing college interviews, requesting recommendations from teachers, requesting recommendations from an outside rec or a peer rec, completing 4 sections of the Common App that don't take that long, even that they're important: the family section, the profile section, the education section, and the testing section of the Common App. Those are all components of the process, but I wouldn't regard them as time-consuming components. Now let's take a look at the parts of the college application process that are very time-consuming. And like I said, next week I'll give you my recommended time when I feel you should be embarking on these various tasks. That'll be part 2. All right, so there are 2 to me that stand out the most because each one of these is 50-plus hour investment to do it well. The others are all time-consuming as well. For some people, some of the others may take longer than these, but 2 in particular. And the first is college research. One thing I don't like is when I build a list for a student, and then they say, and I follow up with them, see how the research is coming, and they're like, well, it doesn't really matter to me, what a college is like. I just want to go to a place that's ranked high. And that's going to bother me because some of the people that I get asked to help with the transfer process are people that thought that way, only get to a place and they're miserable, or they're just having a very meh experience. So to me, this college research phase is very, very important. You're trying to discern match and fit, and there are just so many factors to consider. I mean, you were talking about a minimum of 5 hours per school on a conservative side to do it well. And you say, Stuck, what should we be researching? What should I be doing? Well, that really is going to depend on what you value. For some people, it's all about career results. Others really want to do a deep dive into the curriculum or faculty bio. Others want to spend a lot of time trying to figure out the school culture. And of course, for most people, all these things are important in order to see if my kind of kid is there. Others are looking for unique opportunities, experiential opportunities, maybe research, internships, co-op, study abroad. Others are interested in things like housing or want to look at the facilities in some other area that could be very important to them. It could be fraternities or sororities. For others, it's reading student reviews or learning about the student experience or the profile of the student or how the college is going to evaluate me. And we're just touching the surface of all the things you could research. I really see 2 phases to the research part, and they're both time-consuming. First, you have to do the research to determine which colleges you will actually apply to. But like I tell all my students and parents, applying is not committing to go. Then you have to do the research to decide, of all the schools you've been admitted to, which one will you decide to deposit and attend? So there's kind of phases to the research. I always tell people, you never stop researching until you enroll. And to tell you the truth, you really shouldn't stop researching then. You should still be continuing to learn about the culture, even if it's just reading school newspapers or reading about the strategic plans. You want to continue. We talk about being a continual learner. We want to be a continual researcher. The next one that takes a real significant amount of time, and for some people, it's not going to be that much time, but for many, it will be. And this really depends on the schools you end up applying to. But here I'm referring to the custom prompts, the college-specific essays or prompts, what most people call writing supplements. Now, I don't judge anyone who calls them writing supplements. The Common App itself uses the term, so you could even argue that's their name. But let me tell you why I don't use that term. I happen to think that language, vocabulary really matters in terms of the impression it forms on you. So a common complaint that I hear when talking to admission officers is that there's a drop-off in quality from the personal statement that they get from students to these custom prompts. This is also my experience as well in reviewing student work. Most people just don't do a great job on these custom prompts. Part of it is because they don't know how to do them well, and part of it is because they think that because they're shorter and they're only going to one school rather than a bunch of schools, that they're less important. But nothing could be further from the truth. But that's what people assume. It's shorter, it's just going to one school. How important could this 150-worder really be? So I choose to call them custom prompts or college-specific essays or college-specific prompts to elevate them, to give them a level of respect that they deserve. These things take a long time to do well. And if you're either applying to very selective schools or to a lot of schools, you're going to have to write a lot of these. And the research alone takes time, and then there's the execution with the writing. Very time consuming. The next area that takes a lot of time is college visits, especially if you're looking at some out of region options that are going to involve hotel, airfare, being away from your home. For those are all consuming trips. The entire day, it's all part of the college process. There's really not much else you're going to be able to do. These trips can take days, and they are a major reason why sophomores will start the process now to get the visits in. There's only so many times school's going to allow you to take a break, and that's got to be coordinated with parents' availability and the school's opening, and the availability on the school's part for you to come out there and schedule. So starting off now is a very good time for sophomores if you're looking at out of region schools, out of the area. The next thing that can be very time consuming is everything related to money. And I mean everything. So I'm talking about figuring out what your actual budget is for college. That in of itself is a task that takes some time if you do it well. There's a lot involved in that to do that well. Talking to your kids about money, getting on the same page with them around everything from if they're going to take out loans, which loans, how much loans, are they going to work? Are they working the school year during the summer? How much are they expected to contribute? Are they expected to pursue outside scholarships? How much can you contribute? Filling out the forms, the FAFSA, the CSS profile, institutional forms, any aid appeals. The money part takes time. The next thing that's very time consuming is completing the activities section of the Common App. This is time consuming because there are so many parts involved in it. First, you have to decide which activities to include. And remember, activities is a really bad name. It's really looking at your time commitments. Colleges want to know how you spent your time. So which of the ways in which you spent time in high school are you going to highlight or showcase? What order are you going to put them in? What title are you going to choose? And what description are you going to use in the body of the writing? And you have 150 characters. That's 150 characters, not words. How can you use them to be as impactful but yet accurate as possible? That's time consuming. The next area that's very time consuming is the personal statement. This is, of course, something that should be personal and it should make a statement. 650 words goes to pretty much every one of the 1,100 plus schools. The Common App is partnership, which is the majority of schools in the country. I mean, you have the UC, CSUs, you have some places that are not on there. And you certainly have some less well-known schools that are on there that generally don't get a lot of applications. And you get your one-offs like your MITs and your Georgetowns that have their own application. But for the majority of other schools are on that Common App. And the overwhelming majority of them require the personal statement. And even the ones that don't, you can send it, and it's recommended that you do. So what makes this time consuming? You got to go through brainstorming. We use brainstorming exercises to help identify the best topic. Then you got to do an outline. Then you got to do multiple drafts, usually at least 4, and sometimes as many as 6 or 7, and then the grammatical revisions at the end. So that's time consuming. The next area that's time consuming is all the additional writing. Now, other than the personal statement, other than the college-specific custom prompts, which we've already discussed here, I'm referring to things like the additional information section. Fortunately, it's now 300 words instead of 650. The letters of continued interest if you're deferred. The new challenges and circumstances 250-word essay that most people should write. Any honors college essays. There's just a lot of additional writing in the file. Another thing that may be very time-consuming is test prep. Now, this is going to vary from person to person, but for quite a few students, they're going to take the test twice. And some will take an ACT and an SAT, so they may take it 3 times altogether. And then there's test prep. And whether this is one-on-one tutoring, group test prep, or self-study, it's likely to be a 30 to 50-hour time commitment between the work you do on your own and the tutoring sessions you attend. So that's a big chunk of time. So it's something not to take lightly. The last thing that is very time-consuming is if the student decides to go for outside or external scholarships. They have to research the scholarships, which is very time-consuming. Otherwise, you're wasting your time because you'll be aiming at scholarships that are just not appropriate for you. And then you have to complete all the applications. And then usually there's an essay writing component in this. I intentionally didn't mention the essay writing component in the last point because I wanted to just keep the scholarships as its own entity, but there's oftentimes writing involved in that, securing recommendations, lots of things here. So there you have it. Those are the most time-consuming parts of the application process, in my opinion. But like my dad always used to say, son, if something is worth doing, then it's worth doing well. And next week I'll share with you when I feel you should complete each of these sections. I'm not trying to stress anybody out. I'm actually trying to do the opposite. I'm trying to have you to have a plan so you don't feel this stuff snowballs on you. I'll never forget a conversation I had with one of my favorite students. In fact, this, other than my brother's son, Alex, this student is probably the closest thing I had to having a son. His name's Dominique, and we just became really good friends. And then, boarding school, I'm his advisor. We played golf. We did golf tournaments over the summer. But I remember him saying to me, people told me the 11th grade would be hardest, but they lied. It's the 12th grade because he procrastinated. He was doing this stuff in the fall of 12th. And if you do this stuff in the fall of 12th, you will feel like you just added 2 classes to your schedule. So that is not what I want you to do. So like I said, we'll get more into timing of this next week, but we will now transition to our brand new interview with Rob Franek, the chief editor of Princeton Review, as he shares the results of the 23rd edition of their College Hopes and Worries study.
And now this week's interview with a special guest.
Friends, in part 1 of my interview with Rob Franek, Rob explains to us how the study was done. Then Rob explains whether the questions change from year to year. Rob tells us what the hardest part of the college process is according to their research, which really dovetails with the conversation I just had. Rob shares this key findings from the survey. Rob talks about what is your stress level about college and how students responded to that question. Rob explains his role at the Princeton Review. Rob explains what parents and students thought was the most important thing in the college selection process. Rob talks about the biggest change in the survey over the years he's observed. Rob talks about how financial changes are impacting decisions he has seen colleges make regarding admissions. Listen and enjoy. Friends, Rob Franek is back from the Princeton Review. Hey, Rob.
Hey, Mark. Thanks for the invitation.
Well, you just released this College Hopes and Worries study, and that's like the kind of thing that all of our listeners are interested in. What is this, year 23, 24? Something like that?
Yes, it's the 23rd year for our College Hopes and Worries survey, and it's a survey of college-bound students and their parents. And you and I have talked about this in the past,
Sure.
this idea of understanding where students and parents are hopeful around the college.
Sure.
That's an easy conversation. But when
Yeah.
we can understand where they're worried, where they're stressed, where they're nervous, that is where the gold is.
Absolutely. So why don't you start by telling us kind of how you did the survey, and if you want to just kind of give some of the key findings, and we can talk
Oh,
about it.
sure.
Yeah.
Sure. So as I said, it's a survey of college-bound students and their parents, 23 years doing this at Princeton Review. It's been so interesting because we've been collecting this information. It's just shy of 9,400 students and their parents submitting information for the survey annually. And, I give a lot of talks, as I know you do, just to college-bound students. So I liberally reference this survey because I'm like, this is information from students and parents who were literally in your seats last year. And we asked them all sorts of questions. One of the things that we do ask them, which will come up in my lecture tonight here in Laguna Beach, is, this idea of what would be your best fit school or your dream school if cost and academic admission were not factors? And that kind of gets people going and thinking about the schools that have been in their noggins for a long time. But then we start to think about what's the perception of those schools? Is it just because it has a glorious brand? Or is it because I'm going to be a ridiculously good fit there academically or otherwise? So just the dream schools list, I'll just give you the first taste of the 1 and 2 on each side. So students picked number 1, MIT, and number 2, Harvard, and parents picked for dream schools were Princeton and MIT. So again, there are some usual suspects on this list. And
Yeah, see, Stanford came in number 3 for both students and parents.
Oh, yeah. I mean, them and their 59,000-ish applications this past year. I mean, was it 3.4% of whom were actually admitted? So, I mean, these are glorious schools. The way I use this list, and I think the survey backs this up, this idea of questioning at the beginning of our research process, what does fit mean for us? And we can use the word of dream school, or we can use the word ultimately of saying, where am I going to be a best fit academically, campus culture, financial aid, career services, and that's the information that really comes out on this survey. So that's where I've been so keen on understanding where students and their parents are a little nervous, because then folks like you and me can start to talk about this stuff and bring down the pressure in the room, whether that's a virtual classroom or in person.
One of my favorite tidbits of information from this study, and almost 10,000 people took this on this online survey. So they asked, what is the toughest part of the admission process? And so I'm just going to read the responses and then have you amplify with some commentary here, Rob. So what came in at number 1, 35% completing the financial aid applications. Number 2, very close by, taking the SAT, ACT, or AP exams, 32%. Then there's a drop off, 17% researching colleges and deciding which ones to apply to. And then another one that had a significant contribution, a significant number, 16% choosing which college to attend. What do you want to say about this?
Oh, well, a couple of things. Well, the first part and the biggest piece of the pie, as you had noted this past year, is completing applications, admission applications, and financial aid applications. And just coming off of the difficulties with the FAFSA form last academic year, I think many parents in there, had kids that were applying to school last year as well and might have been primary sources in some of that difficulty. So we saw that loud and clear on the survey. I think that people are just nervous around cost in general and successfully navigating the financial aid and college cost process. We saw that in the survey, which I know we're going to hit on in a latter point. So that does cause a great deal of angst and worry and just overall stress. And then SAT, ACT, AP exams, just standardized tests in general, Mark, and you and I can teach the graduate school course on this continuously. The SAT and the ACT, and to a slightly lesser degree AP exams, are a giant weight for students and parents. And even through our test optional lens, these tests are still valuable. Let's remember, and I know your parents know this, but just to say it out loud again, test optional means that you needn't submit your SAT and ACT scores for academic admission or your students, your kids, but it doesn't preclude you from doing it. So we have not only the difficulties of those exams, but then the choice that you have to make whether to submit or not, and just adding some stress to the process. And then the last part, I'm giving a talk out here in California this week, a couple different nights, on the rise of AP testing. And just thinking about now, in addition to the SAT and ACT, There are now 40 AP exams, near all of which are going digital or at least hybrid digital come May of 2025. That was a huge pivot in the summertime of 2024 when the College Board said, hey, we're not going to do just 9, but we're going to do most of our AP exams hybrid or digital or hybrid. So we know that these standardized tests, not only the difficulty of the content, but also the platforms themselves might cause us some anxiety.
Yeah, speaking of anxiety, here's another interesting finding from your survey. What's your stress level for the college application process? And you have 4 options: very high, high, average, low. So very high came in at 29%, high came in at 44%, average at 25%, and low is only at 2%.
Ooh,
Now, of
I
course, this is a group of parents and students who are college bound. So I probably have to always say that in that context, but still, 2% is really low. So here's my question for you on this. I know the majority of your questions, I think you have 20 questions, if I remember correctly, and maybe 17 or 18 of the ones you've been tracking for a really long time, and then you add 2 or 3 every year.
Yep.
Is this one of the ones that you've been tracking for a while? And if so, what do these numbers look like compared to past years?
It is absolutely one that we have been tracking over time, and when we can group those 2 stressors together for the 2 stress categories for high and very high, that's 73% of all students applying to college. Which I think for you and I, but certainly for many of the parents listening, just to understand that one, they're not the only ones that are stressed, and their kids are not the only ones that are stressed about the college process. This is a near universal weight when it comes to college admission. Now, I do think, and I think this is why you and I have been great colleagues for a long time, that there's a knowable and a navigable path here. But when we look back over time, 5 years ago, and certainly when we started this survey in the early aughts, the stress level was far lower for students and their families in the college process. And I don't want to be Pollyannish about that, but I do want to note that any number of things can cause regular stress levels. And I think you and I have talked about this in the past, but it's good to note it again. Just the idea of college costs in general. College costs have continued to rise 2 to 3 percentage points past the rate of inflation every year for the last 23 or 24, nearly consecutively. So, just given those statistics over that 20 plus year period, we know that it continues to increase levels of stress for the typical student and parent.
You know what, Rob? I realized I was so casual when I first introduced you. If someone didn't hear our past interview, Rob is the chief editor of the Princeton Review. Why don't you just briefly talk about your stint in college admissions and getting to the Princeton Review in case someone didn't hear our previous interview?
Oh, yeah. And I appreciate it. Yeah, this is my 25th year at the Princeton Review. I used to teach for Princeton Review when I was an undergrad. I went to a little school in New Jersey called Drew University, and I used to teach for Princeton Review for the SAT as a tutor and ACT and then so on. But then I got into college admission after I graduated from school, worked in college admission for 5.5 years, and then I saw in the Chronicle of Higher Ed that they were looking for somebody to lead the Princeton Review was looking for somebody to lead their publishing division, which was a measly 15 titles at that time, Mark. Now we have a little over 150, so there's a lot of them. But yeah, as editor-in-chief, I'm responsible for our channels of content and any number of verticals. Certainly with Penguin Random House, our publisher, a lot of stuff up on our website. I'm responsible for media and communication at Princeton Review. So yeah, just a bunch of different things. And I spend nearly all of my time during the academic year, at least in the evenings, hosting presentations for students, parents, and counselors. The holy trinity in my mind.
Well, I love where I live in Atlanta, but I'm a little jealous that you're in Laguna Beach right now. You get to do a presentation there tonight. Pretty cool place to travel to.
Yeah, it's not that detailed. You're right.
And I want to publicly thank you. The generosity on you to say, hey, I'll give 100 books away to any of your listeners that send in questions. It's really meant a lot to our listeners. It's been fun to be able to reward them. A lot of times they're nervous. They're calling in and leaving a message on SpeakPipe, and they're just trying to help their kid. And it's nice to be able to sort of thank them because they help make our podcast better. They have a question, and so do thousands of others have the same question. But for you to kind of do that and then send it out from your team, it's really, really kind of you. It really means a lot to me. I just wanted to publicly thank you for that.
You're most welcome. Such a pleasure, and I'm so glad people responded super nicely to us. And yeah, it's a great pleasure. Absolutely.
So here's another question.
Yeah.
which is a very interesting one. So you ask about choosing a college, and then personally, I will tell you I was very, very, very heartened by this question.
Okay, cool.
And
Yeah.
so, what's the exact wording on this question? Do you have it, Rob? Like I see the answers. Is it what's the most important thing to you? Do you think on the actual question? And so it
You
looks
know
like
what?
it might have been.
It is. I'm just going to pull up the exact wording while we're talking. But it's overall, what are the most important things to you or to your to you as a student or parents for their kids in choosing a school? And this is where, Mark, I think the most interesting thing about this is where the dream college exercise of noting some of the most competitive schools in the world or the schools with the best brand, that we start to poke the question here of, is that school, just because it has great brand and great brand perception, is that going to be a best fit for you? And it forces students and parents to say, what is really important to me in the college, not only the college process, but choosing the right school. And 47% of those, nearly 10,000 college-bound students and their parents said it's all about fit. And again, I don't want to be Pollyannish here, but this is incredible to me in
Yeah.
thinking about these verticals of fit. And I feel like this is stuff that is deeply, deeply important to us.
Well, there's a lot of things I like about you, and one of them is just your relentless commitment to preach, match, and fit. You're that's I'm all about that. This podcast is all about that,
Yeah.
and that and your boundless enthusiasm. I love both of them. But just so our listeners know, because they're not looking at what Rob and I are looking at right now. We got the big survey out in front of us with graphs and charts and all this cool stuff from the Princeton Review's website, actually. So the response to what's most important, 47% said college that will be the best overall fit. The second leading response was college with the best program for my child's career interests. That was 32%. 11% college that would be the most affordable. And then 10% said college with the best academic reputation. Now, let me ask you this, Rob, from all your travels and doing this, do you think there are differences to this answer based on income and education level of parents and or region of the country? And I say that because, for example, when I'm working with families in the Boston area, college with the best academic reputation is not 1 in 10. That is not my experience, you
Right.
know? And North Jersey and New York, I would say the same thing. And Bethesda to Northern Virginia, I would
Yeah.
say the same thing. Palo Alto, same thing. So North Shore. So it feels to me there's a regional component to this as well as a socioeconomic component, because I can mention all kinds of other locations if I'm working with highly educated, financially successful families.
Mhm.
They feel to me they put more emphasis on academic reputation than 10%. And what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. And Mark, I appreciate you bringing up this question. I do think that, anecdotally,
Mm-hmm.
there are families that will place a great deal of weight in just the academic reputation of a school. And I'll just couple that with perception of the brand, because I do think
Right.
it's they sometimes can
And
certainly.
and some of it would be the exclusivity too. Like, so
Oh my.
the perception of, wow, your kid is smart if they got in there. I want to be able to signal that.
Of course, yeah, and we're human, and I
Sure.
understand that there's some bragging rights to that. You're proud of your kids, and they're proud of themselves and confident that they've gotten to these schools, and bravo, of course. But I am heartened, however, by this survey and the breadth of the survey that we have. So just a bit short of 10,000 students and parents this year, but students from all over the country. And one of the reasons that I like to talk about it so much, the findings of this and this underscoring of fit, is that even though we might be placing more weight in academic reputation and brand, in my experience, it's good to understand what other people are thinking nationally and to say, hey, it's okay to think about fit. It's okay to, and I think the second point on that, to think about career services, right? To think about career resources that students are going to have. Honestly, Mark, that point, that idea of the career services being so valuable, if I get into this school, I will have a successful path to a viable career upon graduation, or go on to graduate school and then a viable career upon graduation. For students to start thinking about that now, for they and their parents to have that as part of their conversations as students are going through the college research process, that's glorious. And that would have been so difficult to have just 10 years ago. So I do think,
And do you say that because of colleges have beefed up their resources or beefed up the marketing of their resources? Is that the primary reason, or is it because students are demanding? I guess they go, what's first, the chicken or the egg, right? People
yeah,
are demanding that now as part of the evaluation. Like, what's your theory on why it's so different the last 10 years?
I think that schools, because of the expense around
Hmm.
just college costs in
Yeah,
general, schools have had to, and I think
yeah,
appropriately so,
sure.
had to say there is going to be value for your academic investment if you're a student,
Yeah.
and valuable for your financial investment if you're a student and parent. So I feel
Hmm.
like that, Mark, is when the tables turned. And I think understanding that the nervousness around cost and the specter of assuming too much debt is there. But now if a school can say to us, to say to prospective students and their families, hey, we hear you and we see you. And we're going to try to do our best on this financial aid side of the fence and bring you down that sticker cost to something viable for you as a family. But the outcome is going to be glorious. Your college degree is going to be valuable from our school because of these three reasons. And part of that is going to be filling in the conversation piece around career and output into a substantive one.
I think you're totally right. Occasional co-host, former regular co-host, my good friend Dr. Dave Williams from Chicago. He went to Princeton of all places, but he
Yeah.
said when he went, like, getting a job was not the primary thing on his mind. It was like figuring out the world and learning who you are and being exposed to new people and developing your critical thinking and just sort of discovery, that all discovery of self, discovery of the world, getting your bearings. And he said, now that these schools cost X amount, they're forcing me for my daughter to also look at, is there going to be a financial return? Because then his daughter ended up going to a similar school. They're forcing me to think about that. So, I mean, that's a case of somebody literally that evolved from a different perspective to a current perspective because of the cost. Yeah.
I'm so
Yeah.
glad. I'm so glad for the. I mean, to understand that a person can go from one side of the spectrum to understand and appreciate the other with empathy because they're now part of that new cohort. But yeah, college because has gotten too expensive for us to not consider what the output is going to be. And I do think, Mark, as you know, I visit. I'm convinced more colleges than most people on the planet for a living. And if I'm not hearing in the first couple of minutes that I'm on a campus, whether that's from a meeting with the president or a chancellor or dean of admission or any number of students or faculty, if I'm not hearing what students are doing, again, outside the classroom to complement what they learned inside the classroom, then I'm a little suspect. And I feel like they might just be a bit, you know, I'll say this kindly, but tone deaf in
Hmm.
not listening to what students and parents are nervous about. Because
Hmm.
that's the purpose. Like if our purpose is
Yeah.
talking about the college hopes and worries survey, we have to focus on the worries. And then how do
Hmm.
we create resources and conversation to solve for those worries? And if debt and return on our investment are a couple of them, then we have to talk about them. Have to talk about them, pardon
Rob, this is off script, but I'm being curious. So I've really
me.
been thinking a lot on how the financial challenges colleges are facing are impacting them and especially impacting admissions. And of course, there's stuff that's been going on for a while, right? Like we've known about birth dearth, enrollment cliff. You can see that right from when during the great financial crisis when birth rates dropped. You can see
Yes.
how attitudes are changing toward the value of college. We see resistance to the cost of college. We see the rise of alternatives, all of that. More recently, we've got massive stuff with cutbacks to NIH and government funding and all of that impacting colleges in the hundreds of millions in some cases. When you talk to colleges, are you hearing them say anything that's going to be different from an admissions standpoint? Whether that's go after more full pay or expand the size of their class or, I don't want to put words in your mouth,
Yeah.
but, I just did a segment on this. I mean, at the end of the day, they're businesses that need to balance their books.
Yeah.
And if they're losing revenue, whether it's because they lose NIH funding or something else, sure, they can do so much to control costs. We've read about the faculty hiring freezes and canceling of graduate programs. But You have any thoughts on how that's going to impact admissions?
I do, and I appreciate the question, Mark. There are two things to keep in mind, and I'm a trustee at my old school at Drew University, so I'm steeped in it on that
Yep.
side of the fence, which
Yep.
I really value.
No, that's a
Being a
great
trustee,
lens.
it totally is, and I've been on the board for
Yeah.
10 years, so
Yeah.
I really appreciate how it has informed or
Hmm.
just my own critical thinking
Sure.
about the way schools function. But that's just 2,000 undergraduate students, and
No, but they're not. Some of the same questions they're having there, they're having elsewhere. You can believe that they're not the only ones
absolutely,
having. Yeah. So
absolutely.
so what are your thoughts on how, especially from an admission standpoint, how these financial challenges you see impacting admissions?
Two ways. So the admission through the admission lens specifically,
Yeah.
schools are changing the way that they recruit, right? I mean,
Yeah.
if you had a school, let's call it in New Jersey,
Yeah.
and for many years you
Hmm.
recruited in New Jersey, as every other
Sure.
college across the country does,
Yeah.
but then you also recruited in upstate New York and New
Yeah.
England and the Atlantic states. But now, because of the
Hmm.
recession of 2007, 2008, with the demographic cliff, as we know that those student populations are not quite there, so they have to change. They
Sure.
have to think about how they are shifting now to populations that didn't have those same
Sure.
lower birth rates. So students in Texas, in
Sure.
Arizona,
Sure.
Florida, in Arizona, Texas, Florida. In California, of course. California is the big one. So now those schools are recruiting, let's say, in Texas, but now
Hmm.
they not only they can't recruit the same type of student because the students are different. They
Yeah.
might not respond to the same way that they were recruited in the past. So now you have to shift geography and you have to shift nomenclature.
Hmm.
And that to me is interesting because I
Hmm.
think some schools are going to be great at it and some
Hmm.
schools are not. And many
Yeah.
of those students, let's say in that new population, might be first generation college. They might be from an underrepresented student group. So there
Hmm.
might be just other challenges that you'll have to. And again, schools can address all of these things.
Sure.
You have
Sure.
to know it when you're going into. It's not just let's just recruit in this, in this other state that we didn't historically recruit in. So that's one. I
Hmm.
think the second thing is, and I think schools that are saying, okay, let's think about our liberal arts model because most schools are tuition driven. Let's call it
Hmm.
95% are
Yeah.
tuition driven. So they have to balance the books, as you say, but are we going to be able to balance the books with the same liberal arts model that we did
Yeah.
5 years ago or
Yeah.
25 years ago? And I think schools that are really poking at this
Hmm.
and are saying, "Hey, let's poke at some of these taboos. Um, can we balance out, what our career outcome is going to be with a liberal arts ideal?" And I suspect we can, but we have to have this conversation, and it might be a difficult one.
Friends, this concludes part one of my interview with Rob Franek. Hope you join us next week for the final part. On Thursday's episode, Vince and I will discuss some observations from decisions we are seeing from colleges this year. This is a 3-part series that will air over the next 3 weeks in our In the News section. For a question from a listener, Hilary will join me to take a question from a listener who is looking for tips on how to get the most out of a college fair. For our interview, Don Williamson, who works for Comcast Advertising as the Chief Revenue Officer for Media Solutions, is back for part 2 of 3 on what employers look for when making hiring decisions. And our college spotlight, Kevin Newton, is back over the next 2 weeks. We're going to discuss 2 more universities in London that are very Americanized. Friends, this is decision-making time, and I close you out from some words of wisdom from one of my favorite people in college admissions, someone I'm excited to spend some good quality time with on my Texas trip, someone who will also be a repeat guest on our podcast later this year. It's Heath Einstein, the Vice Provost of Enrollment Management at TCU. And I want you to listen to his advice, especially his advice for students. All right. And the last question is your best advice for 3 groups of people: students, parents, college counselors.
My best advice to students is, as you consider where you will go to college, imagine yourself as a rubber band. And you want to go somewhere that is going to stretch you, perhaps to places that you didn't expect to be stretched, but not to the point where you break.
Ooh.
My advice to parents is that you have only one job in this process, and that is to love your child.
Mm.
And at the end of the day, if your feelings toward your child have anything to do with the bumper sticker that's going on in the car, then you may cause irreparable harm to that relationship. So just remember to love your children and to tell them that you love them. And to counselors, my advice is have enough wine for the whole year, because you're probably gonna need it.
See you on Thursday, friends.
And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. If you find this podcast helpful, please follow us and you'll get every single episode as soon as it is released. If you're interested, there are a few ways you can really support our podcast. You can click the share button and send it to your friends and acquaintances. You can help us pay our staff and our expenses by donating on our website. You can write a review for us on Apple or Spotify. I'm the producer of the podcast, but we have a fantastic team of 15. Shout out to our co-host, Dr. Lisa Ruff, Dr. David Williams, Linda Depker, Susan Tree, Vince Garcia, and Julia Esquivel. And to our substitute co-host, Sylvia Borgo. Our sensational sound engineer is Nemanja Motvich. Our amazing music is from Victor Allen Weeks. Marketing designs are from Kimberly Blass. Lily Parikh manages our Instagram. Our image editor is Talha Khan. Joy Stucker does our website episode updates. And our webmaster is Stalianos Dimitriou. And if you want to have a coaching session with Lisa, Linda, or me, just text me at 404-664-4340. If you have a question you want us to answer, or if you have a recommended resource or article you think we should discuss, just send it to questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. Our favorite method is for you to record your own voice at speakpipe.com/YCBK. By the way, check out our website, where you'll find lots of content that is not on any podcast app. Our website is yourcollegeboundkid.com. If you want to learn about other hot admissions topics, follow us on Twitter at YCBK Podcasts. We think of you as our listening family, and we look forward to meeting again with you every single Monday and Thursday.